he won a bride in a lottery, but when he whispered, "Tell me if I go too fast," her heart trembled. Carson Blake's life had been simple for many years. As a rancher on the outskirts of the colony, he lived alone. His days were filled with hard work tending to cattle and repairing fences, and his nights were spent under a blanket of stars, alone with his thoughts. He had never been the type to dream of a wife, but that all changed when the letter arrived. It was an official-looking envelope, the kind that spoke of authority and importance. Carson squinted at it, unsure of what to expect. As he opened it, the words inside seemed to blur together. It was a lottery, and not just any lottery. The letter explained that, in a move to populate the frontier, the colony had decided to offer women from distant worlds as brides for the men who had the luck to win. Carson had never considered entering any lottery, let alone one that involved a life partner. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. After a long moment of staring at the letter, Carson felt something shift in his chest. He had never expected to find love, but now a small part of him wondered if this was an opportunity for something more than just surviving. Maybe it was time for a change. With the decision made, Carson signed up. He didn't know what to expect, but the thought of sharing his life with someone, having a companion, seemed appealing. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. His ranch was small, but neat enough. Carson made sure everything was in order, though he wasn't sure what he should be preparing for. Then the day came. The shuttle arrived at the landing pad, dusty and old, its engines sputtering. Carson stood at the edge of the ranch, his eyes narrowing against the glare of the sun. As the shuttle's doors opened, a woman stepped out. She was tall, her movements graceful, as though she had never known the hardship that defined life on the frontier. Carson's breath caught in his throat. Her name was Ivy. She wasn't what Carson had expected. She wasn't a wild frontier woman with rugged features, but a woman of refined beauty. She wore a soft dress that seemed out of place in this harsh land. Her eyes were large and curious, her hair dark and neat. She looked nothing like the women Carson had imagined, if he had ever imagined them at all. Ivy stepped forward, her steps unsure but steady. Carson watched her closely, his mind racing. She was here because of him. A lottery had brought her to this place, this lonely corner of the world. He didn't know what to say, and he wasn't sure what to feel. This wasn't supposed to be real. It was supposed to be a contract, a practical solution to a lonely existence. But as Ivy's eyes met his, something inside him stirred. "Hello, Carson," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, and there was something almost sad in it. I don't know what to expect." Carson cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward. "Neither do I," he said. He wanted to offer something more comforting, but the words stuck in his throat. "You'll be safe here. I don't know what you thought life would be like, but I can promise you nothing will hurt you here." Ivy nodded, though Carson could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was far from home, a stranger in a strange land, brought here by nothing more than chance. Carson had never imagined he would be the one to offer someone safety, but here he was. They made their way to the house, Carson leading the way and Ivy following. The silence between them was thick, but neither of them spoke, each lost in their own thoughts. As they walked, Carson couldn't help but notice how small Ivy seemed next to him. She was delicate, the type of woman who might have belonged in a city, not on a rugged ranch like his. The house, small but well-maintained, stood at the edge of a field of wheat that Carson had recently planted. The land was his pride, and he was determined to make it thrive. But as Ivy stepped inside, he could sense her hesitation. The space was simple, with rough wooden floors and basic furnishings. Ivy looked around, her gaze lingering on the bare walls and the humble fireplace. "I'm sorry it's not more luxurious," Carson said. "I don't have much to offer, but this place is mine." Ivy smiled softly. It's all right. It's just different than I expected, but I'm sure I'll get used to it." Carson nodded, though he felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. He wanted to make her feel comfortable, wanted to ease the transition, but he didn't know how. The relationship between them was already strange. They were strangers, thrown together by chance, but neither of them could escape the truth that this arrangement had begun with a lottery and not a choice. They sat down at the small kitchen table, the only sound between them the creaking of the wood and the distant rustle of the wind outside. Carson felt his stomach twist. He had never been good at conversation, and now it seemed even harder. He had no idea how to approach Ivy, how to talk to her like she wasn't a stranger. Finally, after a long silence, Ivy looked up at him. "I know this is strange," she said quietly, "but I want to try. I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm willing to try." Carson's heart softened at her words. She was trying to make the best of something that neither of them had chosen. He could respect that. "We'll figure it out," he said simply, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. I'll show you around tomorrow. You can see the ranch. There's a lot of work to do." Ivy nodded, but she still seemed distant. Carson couldn't blame her. He was distant too. This wasn't supposed to be how it was. There should have been some spark, some sense of connection, but instead there was just silence. That night, as they lay in separate rooms, Carson thought about what he had promised Ivy. Safety, protection, a chance at something better. He wasn't sure he could give her more than that, but he couldn't help but wonder if, in time, something more might grow between them. The stars outside were bright that night, as if the universe itself was watching, waiting to see what would come of this strange union between a rancher and a woman who had been chosen for him by fate, or perhaps just by chance. Whatever it was, Carson knew this was only the beginning. The days passed slowly at Carson Blake's ranch. Each morning, the sun would rise over the plains, casting a golden glow on the fields that stretched for miles. Carson woke early, his hands stiff from the previous day's work, but there was a new feeling in the air now. Ivy was here. She was part of his life, even if it was in a way neither of them had planned. Carson tried his best to show her around the ranch, explaining the work that needed to be done. Ivy, with her soft smile and hesitant steps, followed him. She wasn't used to this life. She had grown up in a world of luxury and comfort, far removed from the dust and labor of the frontier. But Carson saw something in her eyes as she worked. She wasn't complaining. She was learning. The first time they worked together in the barn, Carson noticed how carefully Ivy handled the animals. She wasn't afraid, even when the large cattle moved close. She treated them with respect, as though they were more than just livestock. Carson couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration for her. He had expected her to be out of place here, but Ivy was doing her best, and that was more than he could have hoped for. "I didn't expect to be working so hard," Ivy said one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow. "But I think I'm starting to like it."
Carson turned to her, surprised.
"You're doing well. It's not easy, but you're not complaining." Ivy smiled faintly, her eyes twinkling. "It's different from what I imagined, but it's not bad. It feels honest. Like I'm part of something real." The words hit Carson more than he expected. Part of something real. He had never thought of his life this way. He had always worked alone with the land and the cattle, never thinking about being part of anything bigger than that. But Ivy's presence here, her soft words, made him see the world differently. As the days grew warmer, they spent more time together. Ivy helped Carson with the repairs on the house, learning how to mend fences and patch up the roof. Slowly, Carson began to appreciate her company more and more. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She had become someone he could rely on, someone who, despite her past, could hold her own in this rough world. One evening, as they sat together on the porch after a long day's work, Carson found himself watching her more intently than he had before. Ivy's laughter, soft and genuine, made his heart beat faster. It was the first time he had heard her laugh in days, and he realized just how much he had missed it. "I can't believe you got me to do all that," Ivy said, leaning back in her chair. "I'm used to a life where someone does the work for me. This is a whole new world." Carson looked at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's not much, but it's my world, and now it's yours too." Ivy met his gaze, her smile fading into something softer, something more uncertain. "It's hard," she said quietly, "but I want to try. I want to be here for you." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Ivy was offering something that Carson hadn't expected. Trust. She was starting to trust him, and that meant more than any grand gesture could. For the first time since Ivy arrived, Carson felt a warmth in his chest. Maybe this wasn't just a lottery win, a simple transaction between two strangers. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something more. As the evening turned to night, the stars began to shine above them. Carson sat silently, watching the sky, unsure of what to say next, but he didn't need to speak. The air between them had shifted. It wasn't just the work anymore, it was something deeper. Ivy had shown him a side of himself he hadn't known he had, and for the first time in a long while, Carson felt a glimmer of hope. Days passed, and the tension between them grew. It wasn't something obvious. There were no grand moments, no sweeping confessions. It was the small things, the way Carson found himself looking for Ivy's presence in a room, the way Ivy would glance at him when she thought he wasn't looking. They didn't speak of it, but there was something unspoken between them, something they both knew but didn't acknowledge. One evening after dinner, they sat out on the porch again watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the air was warm with the scent of earth and growing things. Carson looked at Ivy, his heart suddenly racing. "I don't know what to do about all this," he said, his voice low. Ivy turned to him, her eyes soft. "What do you mean? Us. This life. I don't know what's supposed to happen next." Ivy swallowed, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her dress. "Neither do I," she said. "But I know that I want to try. I want to give it a chance. Not just because I'm here, but because I think I'm starting to care for you." Carson felt a weight lift off his chest. He had feared that Ivy would see this as a burden, something she had to endure. But instead, she was offering him something he had never expected. Her heart. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was enough to make Carson feel something he hadn't felt in years. He leaned closer to her, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell me if I go too fast," he said. "But I think I'm starting to feel the same way."
Ivy's heart skipped a beat.
She looked into Carson's eyes, her breath catching in her throat. There was something in his gaze, something real, something deep. She had never expected to feel this way, but in that moment, she knew that she did. Carson's hand brushed against hers, and the simple touch sent a shiver through Ivy. She didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to stay there, letting the moment linger, letting the silence speak for them. The world around them seemed to disappear. There were no words left to say, no promises to make. It was just them, two souls brought together by chance, but now connected by something more than luck. Carson and Ivy sat in the quiet, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The days on the ranch had become a routine. Carson woke early, worked the fields, and at night he sat with Ivy under the stars. The tension between them had softened, replaced by an unspoken understanding. Carson found himself looking forward to the evenings with her more than anything else. They had settled into a quiet rhythm, yet in the back of his mind, Carson knew that life on the frontier was never truly peaceful for long. It was early one morning when the peace was broken. Carson was out in the barn repairing a broken fence when he heard the sound of a shuttle landing. His first thought was that it was one of the delivery ships bringing supplies. But when he looked up, he saw something far more troubling. A man stepped out, wearing the dark uniform of an enforcer, a member of the local law enforcement tasked with maintaining control over the frontier settlements. Carson's heart sank. He didn't recognize the man, but the look on his face told Carson all he needed to know. The enforcer was here for a reason, and it wasn't good. The man approached, his boots crunching on the gravel as he walked toward Carson. "I'm looking for Carson Blake," he said, his voice gruff and direct. "That's me," Carson replied, wiping his hands on his shirt. He squared his shoulders, prepared for whatever was coming. "I've got business with you," the enforcer said, stepping closer. "Your land's being claimed by the syndicate. You've got a choice. Either pay up, or we take it. You've got 30 days. Carson's heart tightened. The syndicate was a ruthless organization that had slowly been taking over the frontier. They controlled everything, land, trade, and even people. They were more dangerous than any natural threat Carson had ever faced, and now they were coming for his ranch. "I'm not selling," Carson said firmly. "I've worked too hard for this place." The enforcer shrugged. "It's not about what you want. You don't have much of a choice. 30 days. Well..." The man turned and walked away, leaving Carson standing in the barn, his mind racing. He had heard rumors of the syndicate's expansion, but he had never thought it would come to this. He had to protect his land, but how? He couldn't do it alone. Carson's thoughts turned to Ivy. She had become such an important part of his life, but now it seemed everything he had worked for was at risk. He couldn't let the syndicate take their home. He wouldn't. Later that day, Carson found Ivy in the garden, her hands busy tending to the flowers she had planted just a few weeks before. She looked up when she saw him approach, her face lighting up with a soft smile. "What's wrong?" Ivy asked, noticing the troubled look on Carson's face. "The syndicate is coming for the ranch," Carson said, his voice heavy. "They've given me 30 days to pay or they'll take everything." Ivy's face paled. "What are you going to do?" Carson didn't have an answer. "I don't know, but I'm not going to let them take this place. Not without a fight." Ivy stepped closer to him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You don't have to do this alone, Carson. We'll figure something out." "I'll help." The sincerity in Ivy's voice made Carson feel a little lighter. He had never expected to rely on someone else, but he realized now that he couldn't do this on his own. They had built something together, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. The next few days were filled with preparation. Carson worked tirelessly to fortify the ranch, adding extra locks to the gates and reinforcing the barn doors. Ivy helped where she could, offering her support and her presence, even when she wasn't sure what to do. One night, after a long day of work, Carson found Ivy sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon. He joined her, the weight of the day heavy on his shoulders. "We'll figure this out," Ivy said, breaking the silence. "We have to." Carson nodded, but his mind was still racing. "I don't know how. The syndicate isn't going to back down. They'll come, and they'll take what they want." Ivy turned to face him, her expression serious. "You don't know that. But even if they do, we'll face it together. You don't have to fight alone, Carson." Carson looked at Ivy, her words settling in his heart. She was right. He had never wanted to rely on anyone. But now, more than ever, he realized that the greatest strength wasn't in doing everything alone. It was in having someone by your side. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. Ivy smiled softly. "You don't need to thank me. We're a team now." As they sat together under the stars, Carson felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had no idea how the coming days would unfold, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. The next few weeks were filled with tension. Carson and Ivy worked side by side, preparing for the inevitable. They knew the syndicate would come, but they didn't know when. Every day felt like a countdown, and Carson's nerves were worn thin. But through it all, Ivy remained his anchor. She was calm, steady, and strong, offering words of encouragement when he needed them the most. Finally, the day came. The syndicate arrived, a group of armed men who looked ready to take whatever they wanted. Carson stood on the front porch, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see the enforcer from before in the lead, his cold eyes scanning the ranch. "This is it," Carson muttered to himself. Ivy stood beside him, her hand resting in his. She didn't speak, but the strength in her presence was enough to steady Carson. He wasn't alone anymore. The enforcer stepped forward, his voice low and commanding. "Time's up, Blake. You've got two choices. Pay, or we take it." Carson's eyes narrowed. "I won't sell." The enforcer smiled, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "Then you'll regret it." The standoff lasted for what felt like hours. But in the end, it wasn't Carson's fists or his strength that saved them. It was the help of the other settlers. Word had spread, and soon a small group of neighbors arrived, standing beside Carson in defiance. "We stand with him," one of the settlers said, his voice strong. The syndicate's enforcer hesitated, his gaze shifting between Carson and the growing crowd of people. Carson had the upper hand now, and the enforcer knew it. He grunted in frustration and gave a sharp nod. "This isn't over," the enforcer warned, turning to leave. Carson stood tall, watching them go. The syndicate had backed down, but he knew this was only the beginning. There would be more battles ahead, but he didn't have to face them alone. As the dust settled and the settlers dispersed, Carson turned to Ivy. She was looking at him with pride in her eyes. "You did it," Ivy whispered, her voice full of admiration. Carson smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "We did it. Together." The sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the ranch. Carson and Ivy stood hand in hand, looking out at the land they had fought to protect. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was home. And together, they would build something new, a future they could share.